Hey guys, Fusion here, and today I'm going to be showing you guys a side of me that you have yet to see on this channel. Most of the content that I've shown you guys on this channel so far has been mainly directly correlated to plants, whether that's how to start your own plants, feed them, clone them, you name it. But today we're actually going to be talking about one of my worm colonies, the red wigglers. I have some other worms as well, but we're going to get into that in another video. It's actually a 4-tier system. I'm going to take you guys through each level, show you guys how I manage my colony, some tips and tricks along the way, and who knows, maybe by the end of this video even you might be inspired to have your own worms. But without further ado, let me go ahead and bring you guys a little closer and introduce you guys to the red wigglers. Alright, so the first thing you're going to notice right off the bat is the worm tower has a few instructions on here on the lid, and to be completely honest, they're actually very good tips and they help you get going if you don't really know what you're doing when it comes to caring for worms. Also, the lid doubles up as a place for you to put your trays as you're going through the different levels. Alright, so let's go ahead and pop this lid and take a peek inside. Sometimes you have worms that congregate on the lid, so I like to take a look before I put it to the side. It seems like in this case everybody's in the tower, so we're just going to set this to the side for now. It also came with this handy thermometer. The ideal temperature is between 70, 80, 85 degrees. You really don't want to go any higher than 90, 95 degrees, and you don't want to go any lower than 60 or 55. Alright, so let's go ahead and put this thing to the side and start digging around in here. So right off the bat, you can see here that this is actually an avocado shell. Let's see what we got going on in here. Typically the worms like to congregate in places like these, and as you can see, we have a few in here already. Look at these guys. They already ate through all the flesh of the inside of this avocado. I've been using this top tray as a feeding tray because when I put food in here, the moisture that the food may have can work its way down from the first level into the second level, then the third and fourth levels. However, typically, I don't like to use the top tray as a feeding tray. I like to use the second tray for that. And I'll tell you why in just a second when we get to the second tray. But for now, what I like to do every time that I pop open my bin, go ahead and start introducing air and oxygen into the soil. Well, I should say more specifically worm castings, because the worm castings is actually what the worms secrete as they go through and eat the food. That's what they poop out. You'll be able to see a few of these guys, but you're gonna see more of them the deeper we go down. And already straight off the bat, I can tell that these guys have ate through most of the food that I've gave them. Usually I see more scraps of food, but it seems like they made short work of what I fed them last time. Anyway, you want to come in here and you want to make sure you scrape off the corners, introduce oxygen, because bacteria, well, the good bacteria at least, you have different kinds of bacteria. You have bad anaerobic bacteria, which not all anaerobic bacteria is bad, but in the case of decomposition and when it comes to taking care of worms, you do want to introduce oxygen into your mix so things don't get damp and you don't start getting nasty smells. Especially for me, I keep my worm tower inside of the house, so if I keep it too humid, it's gonna start stinking up the house, and I definitely don't want that. But you shouldn't have to worry about that. As long as you're maintaining the proper level of moisture, you're not overfeeding your worms, they tend to stay pretty well balanced. Now as I'm digging through here, I'm noticing a lot of these pieces here. This is brown material. This is what's called a carbon source. As you feed your worms, you want to feed them greens, you want to feed them fruits, vegetables, you name it. But as you're feeding them all these sorts of different foods, you need to balance out that nitrogen to carbon ratio. And the way you do that is you introduce carbon sources such as cardboard, leaves, wood chips, you name it. There's all sorts of different sources. You can even shred up newspapers or things like that to introduce carbon. Anyway, as I'm going through here, I'm actually not noticing any smells or anything. This smells like regular dirt, and the worm castings are actually starting to come along pretty nicely too. This dark rich stuff here that you see, that's worm castings. It's not completely finished yet. It's probably still got about another month and a half to go before I harvest. But look at the volume that we have. When I start my trays, I normally make a layer of about an inch and a half of carbon. And then I start feeding my way up and feeding my way up and feeding my way up. And it seems like I'm about 4 inches high, 3.5 inches away from where I started. So that's really good. Alright, well, that's about as good as I'm gonna get it. Let me go ahead and level it out a little bit. And then we can go ahead and look at the second tray right below this one. Now, straight off the rip, you probably noticed that we have some food scraps in here, and that's because the top tray is usually where I leave my most finished tray. I tend to feed on my second tray, so that way, as the second tray fills up and fills up and fills up, I can then transfer it to the top, and what that will do is it will give worms the time to migrate down, and I stop feeding the top tray. Then I come in there a couple weeks later, I move it around, put a light on top of it to discourage those worms from being up there, and I harvest it. But let's go ahead and look in here. This is currently my feeding tray. Oh yeah, look here. Look at all those worms. They're doing really good. They're making short work of this avocado. But if we come in here and we give it a nice scoop, you can see just how many worms are in this bin. Look at all that. They're all over the place. And that's where you're going to see your worms congregate. You're mainly going to see them in your feeding tray. But anyway, we're going to do the same thing that we did for that top tray on this second tray. We're just going to come in here and we're going to introduce oxygen. We're going to take everything, we're going to break it apart, and we're going to mix it up real good. That's actually going to speed up decomposition. And if you look here, this one's actually a lot more richer and darker than the ones from the top tray. And that's because this is my primary feeding tray. So this is a little bit more nitrogen rich. My top one is actually a little bit more on the carbon side. And as you're doing this, make sure you work your soil back to the sides that you already aerated. And you come into the center and you scoop it out. Take these clumps here and break them up. Alright, so now let's talk about the why. Why do I have a worm bin? Well, as worms process their food, they leave behind poop, and their poop is commonly referred to as worm castings. And what makes worm castings so special? Well, worm castings are actually inoculated by the worms and the bacteria within the decomposition process of your bins. So when you take some of this here and you give it to your plants as a fertilizer, not only are you feeding the plants from the nutrition that you have here, but you're actually introducing beneficial bacteria. The bacteria that you're going to be introducing has a lot of practice in breaking down organic matter. So when you put it in your raised garden beds or in your plant pots, they're going to get to work right away, and they're going to start breaking down the organic matter that's already in the soil, which is ultimately going to feed your plant. So you're going to have better plant growth overall. And when it comes to feeding, you can feed them just about anything. Like, for example, right here I have some herbs. I believe this is like parsley or something. As you've seen earlier, I had some avocado. You can even give them the seed. Like, look right here, we have a avocado seed, and yeah, they might not be able to break through this right away. It might sit in there for a few weeks, but eventually it's gonna get so weak that, look at that, it's just gonna come right apart, and they'll be able to decompose this, work it in through the castings, and make the enzymes bioavailable for your plants. Because think about it, a seed already contains all of the nutrition and all of the building blocks to create a plant. So this is actually a very powerful ingredient. Some people even take seeds and sprout them, and as soon as they sprout, they just throw them in a blender. But in my case, I don't have to do any of that. I could just feed it to my worms, they'll work it through the soil, and then I'll come in here and I'll harvest these castings. Alright, well, we got this tray nice and oxygenated, so let's go ahead and get this thing leveled out, and then we can pop this baby off and take a look at the third tray underneath. Wow, we have a lot of worms right here going to work on this banana. Dang, look at that. Oh my goodness, I didn't even know I had these many worms. Look at this, guys. Now that right there is a really good sign that you have a very healthy worm colony. And if we come over here and we start scooping even more, you'll see that it's just full of them. Look at this. Look at that. This here is the third bin. So the very first one is the one that you would put once it's already pretty much filled up and you're just getting ready to harvest it. The second one is your main primary feeding tray. And then this third one here is your secondary feeding tray. Now, the reason why they're all congregated here, because as you've seen, that second tray didn't really have that much food left. They've already worked through most of the food that I fed them. But here, there's a nice amount of food. I mean, look at this banana here. It's one of them bananas that went bad. I went ahead and threw it in here. And they're just going to work on this thing. So there's plenty of food left in here. That's why they're all concentrated here the way they are. And the concept stays the same. You want to come through here and you want to oxygenate the bin. Oh, wow. Look at what we got here. This is actually a plant that's already sprouted. Look at that. That's cool, isn't it? A lot of people have compost bins and worm towers, and they just take seeds that sprout from there and they put it directly in their garden. Now, I'm not going to be doing that today, but it's really cool to see this. As the plant grows and it doesn't have any access to light, it's eventually just going to die back and turn into more food for the worms. So I'll just leave that thing alone for now and keep on digging. And you would look at this and you would think, man, this probably stinks, right? Well, no. This actually smells nice and earthy. This is a properly balanced bin. As long as you don't overfeed, and every time you go in there and you give them a feeding, you give them a nice amount of carbon, it's gonna balance itself out and you're not gonna get any bad smells. You're not gonna get any problems. Your worms, they're gonna be nice and healthy like this. And then a few weeks, a few months later down the road, you're going to be harvesting some beautiful worm castings, way better than any castings you would get from the store. All right, we pretty much went ahead and dug through this whole bin, so let's go ahead and flatten this thing out and take a look at the fourth bin that we have down below. So if you look here, the first thing you're going to notice is a bunch of worms all over the surface. Now this one, you're going to be able to notice right away, it's pretty obvious that this one's extremely moist. Look at this. If I were to put this pile together, it's not even gonna come apart. It's completely saturated. Well, that's because this is the fourth bin. So as your second tray, the main feeding tray, breaks down and all the liquids and juices flow, they fall into that third tray. And then that third tray might get fed here and there. And the moisture from it works its way down here. So ultimately, this is going to be your wettest bin. And because of that, you're gonna treat this bin a lot different than you would treat any other tray. I call this tray the inoculation tray. I typically don't even feed this tray. I just come in here every once in a while and I give them some carbon because I want this to be able to collect as much moisture as it can. Plus, if you don't really feed this tray, over time, the worms work their way down here and they might want to get away from all of that activity. So this might actually be the perfect place for your worms to lay their eggs. Anyway, we're going to move this thing around, introduce some air, help it dry out a little bit because this one is super wet. However, this tray is actually extremely inoculated. So as it works its way from the fourth into the third, from the third into the second, and continues to be fed more and more and more, by the time it reaches the top tray, is going to have the highest concentration of bacteria, the highest concentration of worm castings, and is going to be the most aged castings in your entire colony. All right, well, we went ahead and oxygenated this thing as much as we could. Let's go ahead and pop this tray off and show you guys what we got going on at the bottom. All right, so at the bottom of your tower, it's gonna look something like this. I have never fed this. This is actually just straight up cardboard. And then over time, it's turned into this mush that you see here. There's actually a valve right here that you could turn and it would actually release all of the liquid that collects at the bottom. Now that liquid is extremely good. You could take that liquid and you could dilute it with some water and feed it directly to your plants. And that's one of the best stuff you can give to your plants because it's going to introduce a lot of bacteria. It's going to give them readily available nutrients that they'll be able to uptake right away. And it's going to improve their overall health almost overnight. But anyway, all I'm going to do here is like the other trays, I'm just going to kind of move it around, which to be completely honest with you, it's futile. It's pointless. This is so wet that no matter what I do, it's going to be completely saturated. But even so, look at that. The worms are loving it. There's worms all over the place. And that's how it's going to be. If you have a tower like this that has multiple levels, you're going to find worms in every single level. Depending on what they need, if they need more moisture, they might work their way down. If they want more food, they might work their way up. It's one of the benefits of having a tiered system versus like a tub or some sort of container where they all just sit in the same environment. Alright, so I went ahead and got me some leaves here that I actually collected last fall. And what I like to do when I get to the very bottom of the tower is I take all this mushy wet stuff and I put it into the third tray. Oh no, a lot of my worms fell. Anyway, I take all this mushy stuff and I stick it into the third tray because it's fully saturated. So I'm trying to dry it out a little bit. And then I'm going to take some leaves and I'm going to break them up and put them at the bottom. You could do that with anything. You could do it with cardboard, newspaper, but it just so happens that I have a lot of leaves from last fall, so we're going to be using that today. And this is basically going to reset this bottom layer. All right, there we go. That should be good. We're just going to go ahead and take this tray now and put it right on top of here. And now I'm going to take this mushy stuff here and I'm going to put it in this second tray. I'm not just going to leave it on the third tray because it's just going to seep its way right back down to the bottom. Then I'm going to take this other tray and I'm going to put it up here. And I'm going to take this wet stuff and I'm going to put it right on top of here onto the second feeding tray. Now this is where I'm gonna leave it. Anyway, let's go ahead and take this second tray, which is my main feeding tray, and put it right to the top. All right, now that we're back onto our second tray, I'm gonna show you guys how I go about feeding them. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create 3 trenches. I'm gonna come here and I'm gonna dig a trench and line everything up against this wall here. I'm gonna take this goopy stuff, put it in the middle for now. Then I'm gonna dig another trench over here to the right. All right, we got the 3 trenches dug. Now I'm gonna take some of my carbon material and put it at the bottom of the trench. There we go, 3 trenches, and it's got carbon at the bottom of each trench. Now let me go ahead and get my food. Alright, so today's meal consists of this stuff right here. I have a friend whose deep freezer broke, and I asked him, hey man, did you have any fruits, vegetables, or anything like that that went bad? And he said, yeah, I actually got a couple stuff. So he gave me this here. Obviously the food spoiled, but I went ahead and threw the stuff in the freezer and saved it for a time like this, because the worms don't care if your food is bad or not. They're gonna turn it into some good, delicious worm castings that your plants are gonna love. So I'm just gonna take this stuff here and I'm just gonna spread it on top of my ditches there. And you don't want to feed them way too heavily. You want to go about half an inch worth of food, give or take. In my case, I know I have hundreds, maybe thousands of worms. So they're going to be able to make short work of this stuff here. When you first set up your bin, you don't want to do a heavy feeding like this. But I have fed my worms quite a bit of food and they go right through it. So anyway, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of this here pumice. And this is completely unnecessary, but this is basically just going to increase airflow within your bin. And I just like to take this stuff and lay it across the food. And I'm not going to lie to you, once I run out of this pumice here, I'm not buying anymore. This came with my worms, so I might as well use it. However, something else that did come with my worms, and I am going to buy when it runs out, is some of this rock dust here. This is going to introduce a bunch of different kinds of trace minerals, and is going to make your food a little bit gritty. Your worms need that grittiness in order to be able to process and digest that food. So you just want to sprinkle some of this stuff all across the surface of your food. And if you don't have rock dust, there's no need to worry. You don't have to use rock dust. You can use something inexpensive that most people should already have at home. If you're making breakfast or you're eating eggs regularly, you're gonna have a nice amount of eggshells. And all you gotta do is just dry them out, run them through the blender, and you're gonna end up with some of this stuff right here. I collect my eggshells and I turn it into this powder here, so that way it can introduce not only calcium and a bunch of other different kinds of benefits, but it's also going to be that gritty material that would be substituting that rock salt if I didn't have any. A lot of people like to overcomplicate their bins. I like to keep it simple, and one way to do that is some good old-fashioned eggshells. Now, when you're doing this feeding, you want to make sure you do it kind of like a lasagna. I'm going to come through here and I'm going to cover this stuff, and once I cover it a little bit, I'm going to come back through with a lot of carbon. And I'm going to add it to the bin. And I'm going to do a lot of carbon because I know I just gave them a heavy feeding. Remember, you have to balance out that nitrogen to carbon ratio. All right, I'm satisfied with this amount of leaves. I'm just going to go ahead and leave it as it is. And we're going to take our very top tray and just put it on top. And I'm going to feed this layer without leaves at the bottom because I'm trying to increase the nitrogen and decrease the carbon. That's it. I'm not going to go too hard, and I'm just going to go ahead and cover that up. I forgot the eggshells, but it'll be fine. Every time I come through here, I feed it with eggshells anyway, so throw the thermometer in there. Oh, and by the way, when you do big feedings like that, as the food breaks down, it's going to release thermal energy. So ultimately, your bin is actually going to warm up. That's why you don't want to do too big of a feeding, because it might warm up your bin a little too much, and it could even hurt your worms. You don't really have to worry about that too much if you're doing it inside of the house, but if you're doing it outside in the middle of summer, it's already 85, 90 degrees outside, and you have a lot of decomposition going on in your bin on top of that, then you could do some harm to your worms. So keep that in mind. Anyway, we can go ahead and pop our lid back on there, and voila. Well, there you have it, guys. These are my red wigglers. As you've seen, I keep them in a 4-tier tower. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to leave a comment down below. And if you have a worm colony of your own, please don't hesitate to leave a comment down below with your own tips and tricks. I would love to read it and see what you guys do differently. But that's all I got for you guys today. My name is Fusion, and I want to thank you guys for tuning in to Fusion Grows. I hope I'll see you guys in the next one, and have a wonderful day.